forget Photoshop. This new open source AI model can completely transform your photos while keeping the same person's identity intact. You can change the background, outfit, lighting, or even the entire scene with nothing more than a simple text prompt, all while preserving the face. And the best part, you can run it completely locally inside ComfyUI. So here's why everyone is talking about Krea 2 Identity Edit. We've seen plenty of AI image editing models before, but most of them struggle to keep a person's face consistent. As soon as you start changing clothes or backgrounds, the identity starts to drift. This model is different. It's specifically designed to preserve the person's identity while following your edit prompt as accurately as possible. That means you can turn a casual selfie into a cinematic portrait, change outfits, place someone in a completely different location, add another person into the image, or create an entirely new scene, all while keeping the same face. The consistency is honestly one of the best I've seen from an open source model. So in this video, I'll be using the ComfyUI workflow that I've put together. If you're into open source AI, this is definitely a model worth trying. I'll leave the model, workflow, and everything you need down in the description below. So this is the Hugging Face page for Krea 2 Identity Edit. You can already see some of the example images here, including this goblin transformation and several realistic portrait edits. We'll be using version 1.1, which is the latest release at the time of recording. This is the ComfyUI workflow we'll be working with. To begin, I'm going to disable this section first because it's meant for two-person editing. We'll start with a single-person example. I'll use this image of the girl here, and I'm setting both the height and width to 1536. For this demonstration, I'm using the Krea 2 RAW, although it also works really well with the Turbo model, which I'll show later in the video. Over here, you can see all the available model files. I'll be using the 1.83 gigabytes version because it gives the best overall quality. If you're running a GPU with lower VRAM, you can use the 128 version or one of the smaller variants instead. You'll also need few custom ComfyUI nodes for this Krea 2 workflow. This one right here. Make sure you install those inside your custom nodes folder before loading the workflow. Now let's move on to the prompt. I'm using a simple portrait prompt describing the woman along with details like depth of field and lighting. I'll leave the full prompt on the screen so you can copy it if you'd like. For my first test, I kept things, but even with basic prompts, you can easily change the background or modify the overall environment. You don't need anything overly complicated to get impressive results. For the settings, I'm using 50 sampling steps with a CFG of 2.5. I also tested a CFG of 3, but I noticed it made the face look a little too plastic, so I found that 2.5 produced much more natural looking results. And here's the final image. Honestly, this looks incredibly close to the original. I wouldn't say it's 100% identical because no model is perfect, but I'd easily say it's around 95% accurate, which is extremely impressive for an open source model. I've tested a lot of identity editing models over the past few months, and this one genuinely surprised me. The face, hairstyle, clothing details, and even the small flower patterns on the shirt have been preserved remarkably well. Let's try another prompt. This time I'm writing, the woman is standing on a cliff, she's wearing a black skirt and posing for the camera while holding up a peace sign. I've also added a negative prompt, which you can see below. Since we're using the raw version instead of the digital CFG version, the negative prompt helps clean up some unwanted artifacts. And here's the result. Honestly, this came out really well. The overall composition looks natural, the pose matches the prompt, and the identity has still been preserved nicely. Now let's move on to another example. This time we'll test the workflow using 2 reference images because this is where identity editing usually becomes much more difficult. For this prompt, I'm asking it to create a photo of this woman standing next to a blue-colored pipe. Here's the generated image. You can already notice that the facial details aren't quite as accurate as they were in the single image example. That's something I've also observed when testing models like QuenImage, Flux Context, FireImage, and several others. Whenever you provide two reference images, most models struggle a bit more with facial consistency. That being said, the result is still very usable. The identity is mostly preserved, and the overall composition follows the prompt quite well. Now, let's switch over to the turbo model. This example wasn't generated using the raw model, it was created with the turbo version using only 8 sampling steps. On an RTX 4090, this took roughly 40 to 50 seconds to generate. The raw version, on the other hand, takes around 5 to 7 times longer, depending on your settings and hardware. Even with the turbo model, the results are surprisingly accurate. The clothing details, including the flower pattern, are still preserved, the pose matches the prompt, and she's correctly holding the peace sign. The face also looks very convincing. So, if you're a beginner, don't want to spend too much time tweaking CFG values, or you're working with lower VRAM, I definitely recommend trying the turbo version. For this test, I'm using the Krea MXFP8 Turbo model. These are the prompts I'm using, and the settings are almost identical to before. The only major change is that I've switched the sampler to Euler while keeping the remaining settings the same. And here's the generated image. Honestly, Euler performs really well with the turbo model. Now let's test the ERHD scheduler with the turbo variant, since we haven't tried that yet. I'll switch over to ERHD while keeping everything else the same as the previous example. We'll use the same prompt, create a photo of this woman standing in the middle of the street. The only detail I removed was the blue pipe, but apart from that, everything else remains the same, and here's the final result. Once again, it looks really good. The only noticeable issue is that when using two reference images, the face becomes slightly less consistent compared to single image editing. That's a limitation I've seen across almost every identity editing model so far, so it's not unique to Krea. Overall, I'm genuinely impressed with what this model can do. Considering that it's completely open source, the quality is honestly excellent. So, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what other AI tools or workflows you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.